Have you ever been stalked by an ex? I've been stalked but not by an ex. He was my friend/frenemy for the longest time. It hurt a lot because while we frequently were frenemies growing up, I just thought the enemies part of that was due to annoying behavior and not genuinely bad intentions towards me. I knew he was interested in me romantically, even going a bit obsessive with it, but I never thought he was dangerous, just spoiled. So of course I didn't date him. If he was like that as a friend/frenemy, I couldn't imagine what he would be like as a partner. When everything went down the way it did, we had been friends and I blamed myself for the physical assault aspect. I still do, but I also blame him. He physically assaulted me afterwards a day or two later, and it finally got through to me that this person was not my friend. He began stalking me online after the assaults because he was across the world at the time as a soldier, and internet stalking laws were very much in their infancy at the time. I tried for a restraining order but it didn't happen. So he both was and wasn't an ex. He was an ex-friend but not an ex-lover. When he assaulted me, given the situation and how it happened, I know I made myself vulnerable to his brand of crazy, but he did not have to assault me. It was a choice, his choice. My experience with him is in one of my answers here on Quora. I understand that people may not agree about what it was or wasn't, but I know that it didn't feel right and still torments me, having created new triggers with my CPTSD. I know that had that been my physical partner lying there as still as a corpse with their eyes so far away and feeling so far away from me emotionally, I would have been concerned, not intent on physical activity. He seemed to have thought the physical activity meant more and became, in retrospect, manic after the assault. He seemed convinced we would be together when I just went along with whatever he said he wanted to do that night so I could get out of there and get home faster. He was not a romantic partner, but he was a friend. Friends who knew us both have asked me how I couldn't see the kind of person he was. It's because I wanted to believe people could change, that people want to break the patterns that hurt them, that they want to be better than who they were. It took me a long time to see that some people don't think there's anything wrong with them and that they don't think they need to change, or that their problems aren't causing massive interpersonal issues, or creating new unhealthy issues with others. I saw the best in him that I could, and it led me to some bad places where I got to see who he really was/is. When the intimate and physical assaults were over and the stalking began, I was in disbelief. I felt betrayed. I felt stupid because people had warned me about him, but I was so sure the good in him was more than his negative personality traits. I look back now and I felt truly betrayed as a friend at the time because I had believed he was a good person when others did not. I know now that was my own mistake and I have no one but myself to blame. I felt hurt and upset. I was also hurting because not only had he betrayed me in some of the worst ways you can betray someone, I had lost a friend, someone who had no problem being straight with me when others would lie to my face. And then when I found out I was pregnant because of the assault, I felt even more hurt and angry. While I tried to give him the opportunity to be in my daughter's life, I was very in denial about the assault but couldn't deny her the chance for more love in her life. He would cross the line and become verbally, mentally, and emotionally abusive. At the time this all happened, we lived in me, and their laws about paternity rights and marriage gave him no rights at all, not even to get a paternity test, but gave my husband all paternal rights. We didn't have to offer him a place in her life but wanted to be honorable. After the last time he became abusive, we shut him out. She was only a few weeks old when that happened. I was very angry with him that he couldn't put aside his anger and resentment and obsessiveness to be in my daughter's life for her without making it all about control and mind games and trying to get to me. I was afraid of him but angry he couldn't grow up and put her first. He then watched us for years, and when we moved to a different state where the paternity laws were different, he waited the minimum amount of time for us to be considered legal residents and pursued us for custody rights. He gave up 9 months later, without explanation, after calling us every nasty thing he could in court and creating absolute chaos in our lives. To give you an idea on this, my daughter is autistic, very high functioning, but when she was younger, not so much. She'd been evaluated by 7 different professionals in different medical fields across 2 different states and they all said the same thing: ASD. He stated to the court that our daughter didn't have autism. I was giving her autism via Munchausen by proxy because I was mentally unstable due to my PTSD diagnosis. That's just one of the things he claimed over that 9-month battle. He surrendered his paternal rights to my husband, the only daddy my daughter has ever known, and my husband adopted her. We are required by the adoption agreement to send him an update and a digital picture once a year. It's like being stalked, but it's totally legal. I could never prove the assault, so this is what happened. Do I think he's still watching us? Yes, I do. Do I think it's about my daughter? No, I don't. It took me a long time to not care that he was watching us and to feel like I could live my life regardless of his actions. How did I feel when he began stalking me? Betrayed, hurt, angry, ashamed, like something was wrong with me and I was guilty and responsible for his bad choices, and in the end I felt really scared. I hated him for what he had done, but I hated him most because we were friends and due to his actions we could never be friends again. It might sound weird, but I was really angry/hurt/sad because I had viewed him as a friend and he had only viewed me as a pawn to control, manipulate, use, hurt, and dominate. I wasn't even who I am to him. I was some fantasy he made up in his head, and of course when my behavior deviated from what he expected, because how could it not, he punished me. And then watched me like I was prey. As I became more and more aware of how dangerous he was as a person, I became more and more frightened of leaving my home. I felt like he was watching me all the time. Our house was broken into and my engagement ring was stolen, and I was certain it was him or someone doing it for him. I became more and more frightened over time, eventually kind of collapsing in on myself mentally before I got some help. The fear was truly awful, especially when paired with the mind games he would play. His choices taught me some valuable things that helped me make better choices for myself, but he created significant trauma and triggers and contributed to my CPTSD diagnosis. All that damage, and he wasn't even a romantic partner, he was a friend. As a woman, what do some men do that creeps you out? When I was a young woman, crossing by groups of men of any age was so terribly humiliating because of the things they would say, mostly to impress their friends with their bravado. I have two extreme 1970s incidents. Keep in mind that I was not looking for masculine attention. I covered up, wore long skirts and big sweaters, and, this being Canada, coats and scarves. Almost no makeup. I had already had a couple of lower-key incidents that day when I walked past a coffee shop where a few old men were gathered outside smoking, drinking coffee and oogling women and girls of all ages who walked by. Like all women, just walking down the street when groups of men are present is a dreary experience. But I was in a really bad mood, and I heard one of them say how nice it would be to shove it up my ass. I turned and slapped him so hard that his head hit the corner of the window hard. I called him a pencil dick and said he was a cowardly little man. Then I turned to the rest and asked if any of them had anything to say. Miraculously, they were unable to do so. The man I slapped had moved now, and there was blood on the corner of the window frame. This was satisfying. My hand hurt for a long time. Still satisfying. The second incident happened while crossing a construction site when it was impossible to cross the street to avoid them. They said things like, "Hey baby, wanna suck my cock? Hey baby, got time for a bang? I got something you want right here in my pants. How far up your ass is your G-spot? I'll bet I could find it if you bend over. I ain't got no time to bang, so can you just suck me off?" GRRRRRRRRR. I stood there and wrote down the name of the construction site from the sign, and other bits of information, intersection, time, number of men working near the sidewalk. I knew this company was anchored in this city. Then I took a cab whose driver, luckily, knew where the office was. I was so humiliated and angry that I was shaking. I asked to speak to the owner for 5 minutes. The office staff didn't really know what to do. While I waited, I asked a typist if the owner had any family members working there. Yes, his wife in accounts receivable and his teenage daughter was filing. I asked for them to join me when I spoke to the owner. They were notified and joined us out of curiosity. I explained the problem, and I quoted those men, word for word, in front of the owner's wife and teenage daughter. I waited for a response, and then to my dismay and disgrace, I started to cry. Damn it, I am not a weenie given to crying over anything. I broke my foot and didn't cry. I solved problems and, at that time, had gone years without crying, and here I was, an adult woman crying because those men had humiliated me for the amusement value. Crying was so unexpected and so sudden, and as much as I wanted to present myself as a reasonable, responsible adult with a legitimate complaint, the tears just flowed. They stared at me, horrified, and I just sat there. The owner called the site manager of the site and told him to shut down the site for the rest of the day and to report to him immediately. He said this would not happen to me again at any of his sites, and then I just fled. I got home and stayed there, and that was that. Since then, when men are this inappropriate, I say something, although I haven't called anybody a pencil dick for a long time. What was the most legendary thing your grandmother did? It was during the Great Depression. My grandmother discovered that her husband, my mom's alcoholic father, was physically abusing my, then 12-year-old, mom. Grandma kicked him out of the house to protect my mom and her siblings, including 4 other girls. Only my mom and my grandmother knew what had happened, and why the bastard was no longer in the home. This was during the Depression. That bastard was the family's sole income, so Grandma had to find work to begin supporting her family of 9 children. My oldest uncle, George, quit high school to also work and help support the rest of the family. They had very little before, and even less after that bastard was kicked out, but Grandma was determined to protect her children, and support them any way she had to. My Aunt Kathy, the youngest of those children, told me that late one night when they were all in bed asleep, she, only a little girl then, was awakened by the voice of the neighbor lady talking to Grandma in the living room, and she snuck over to the doorway and listened to their conversation. The woman was telling Grandma that there was no way that she would be able to support all of those kids, my aunts and uncles, by herself, and that Grandma would have to give some of them up to the orphanage. Aunt Kathy told me that she was terrified at this, the fear that she and maybe some of her brothers and her sisters would end up in an orphanage. But as she continued to listen to their conversation, she heard Grandma say, "No, I won't give up not one of my children, not one." And she didn't. She kept her family together, took care of 9 children through the Great Depression, with the help of my teenage Uncle George. I didn't know this until Grandma was very old, but my maternal grandmother was one of the strongest and most amazing women that I've ever known, and she saved my mom's life by kicking out that bastard that was their only means of support during the Great Depression. One of the reasons that meant even more to me was because one of my very first girlfriends, 16 or 17 years old when we were in high school, was living with her mother and stepfather, and she confided to me that her stepfather had physically abused her for many years. "Does your mom know what your stepfather had been doing to you?" I asked. "Yes," she said, she knew. But she didn't do anything about it because she was afraid that if she stopped him, he would kick us out of his house, and we would have no place to live. I was incredulous. My girlfriend's mom, basically, sold her own daughter as a sex slave to her stepdad, so they would have a place to live. For a place to live. As if there was nowhere else in the world that they could have a roof over their heads. She sold her daughter for that. Whereas, my grandmother gave up every possible comfort she had to save my mother, and my young aunts, from that. My girlfriend's mother was worthless, human garbage. Never have I seen a more stark difference in humanity. Also, I so admire my grandmother because years later when Mom had taken Grandma to the doctor and Grandma was told that she had a fatal cancer, Grandma simply replied, "Okay." Mom said the doctor rushed to say, "No, Mary, don't give up. There are several things that we can try so there's no reason to give up." Mom said that Grandma leaned forward, put her hand on the doctor's shoulder and comforted him, saying, "I've raised a family, and they now have their own families, and I've done what I was sent here to do. I'm ready to go, and it's okay, it's okay." Mom said the doctor began fighting back tears. Even in the face of death, my grandmother was so brave and solid. Even death didn't scare her, as her strong Christian faith gave her all that she needed to raise 9 children alone, and to face death alone as well. She had all the strength that she needed, strength that she asked God for, and was given.